The emergency bay lights flickered to life just as the battered freighter groaned into docking position, its hull scorched with plasma scoring and deep gouges in the alloy. The orbital station's hangar crew stood ready, but none approached. Not yet. They waited for the clearance signal and, more importantly, for the containment team to secure anything that might be loose. Inside the freighter, chaos had left its fingerprints on every surface. Cargo crates were splintered, walls were dented from the inside, and a thick stench clung to the recycled air. When the hatch finally hissed open, a single figure stumbled out, a tall, pale green alien wearing a shredded diplomatic sash and gripping a containment module that rattled violently in his four-fingered hands. It escaped containment 3 times during transit, the alien wheezed, his eyes wide with barely contained panic. We lost 2 handlers and our exobiologist. It cannot be treated. It is untamable. Untreatable. The station chief stepped forward, keeping a wary distance. Then why bring it here? The alien looked around until his gaze settled on a human standing off to the side, wearing a worn gray coat with a faded patch that read, Veterinary Services Interstellar Certification. I was told Earth has specialists, the alien said. The human stepped forward, squinting at the rattling module. Name's Russ Kane. You can call me Russ. Russ adjusted his gloves, leaned close, and peered through the mesh of the crate. Inside, a creature the size of a large dog snarled and slammed against the walls, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Its fur was a mottled mess of dark violet and silver, its teeth jagged, and its tail lashed with a rhythm that was oddly familiar. Russ blinked. Wait a minute. The alien flinched as the creature hurled itself again at the side of the container. Do not provoke it. It decapitated Technician Valis in under 3 seconds. Yeah, Russ said slowly. That's a brindle-faced kyrix. I think you guys call it an alpha-sec predator or something. On Earth, we just call them ripperogs. You allow these to live among you? Russ shrugged. Some folks keep them as pets. I had one when I was a kid. You just gotta know how to handle them. The alien stared in disbelief. It consumed a control panel mid-flight. Yeah, they do that when bored. Russ straightened up and turned toward the station chief. Can I get access to a medbay with containment protocols for mid-sized canids? The chief hesitated. You're sure? Russ cracked his neck. It's just a house pet. 30 minutes later, Russ stood in the medbay, now repurposed to receive the creature. The crate had been placed inside a reinforced room, and the station's medical AI was running environmental controls to simulate Earth-like conditions. The alien, who introduced himself as Envoy Talek, refused to enter the room. I'll be outside, Talek said, pressing himself against the wall. Russ rolled his eyes. Suit yourself. He stepped into the room and closed the pressure door behind him. The creature, now slightly calmer, watched him with narrowed eyes. Its tail flicked. Russ knelt slowly, unclipping a scanner from his belt. All right, let's get a look at you. He extended the scanner and began a slow lateral sweep. The kyrix growled but didn't charge. Vitals are stable. Elevated adrenaline, mild lacerations, left foreleg slightly swollen. Russ narrowed his eyes. You sprained it, didn't you, dummy? The kyrix bared its teeth. Russ reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. He opened it, revealing a dried meat stick. You remember this smell? The kyrix twitched its nose, then lunged fast. Russ barely flinched as it barreled into him, jaws wide. But instead of biting, it snatched the treat and leaped away, crunching happily in the corner. Talek's voice came through the intercom. Did it just accept a bribe? Russ stood up and dusted himself off. That's not a bribe. That's positive reinforcement. The next hour was a flurry of activity. Russ administered a sedative not to knock the kyrix out, just enough to dull the edge, and began treating the leg. The skin confirmed a sprain, not a break. He wrapped it, applied a joint stabilizer, and scanned for deeper tissue trauma. Nothing life-threatening. The creature growled once, but Russ murmured soothing words and scratched behind the ear ridge, right where he remembered his own dog liked it. Finally, Russ stepped out of the room, pulling off his gloves. Done. Talek blinked. You are unharmed. Yeah. Walked it through everything. He's not aggressive, just overstimulated. Probably got scared when your crew tried to sedate him with stun rounds. They used no stun rounds. They used plasma darts. Russ froze. What? Plasma darts? Are you nuts? He shrugged them off. Russ turned slowly toward the containment room. Then we have a bigger problem. Over the next 2 standard days, Russ ran deeper diagnostics. The kyrix had adapted to plasma exposure, its skin cells showing signs of rapid ionization resistance. That wasn't normal. He contacted Earth's Exopet Registry. No known kyrix had that ability. Station Command grew nervous. The creature was docile with Russ, but every time someone else approached, it growled, paced, or tried to bite through the enclosure. "You need to put it down," said Commander Helvin, a grizzled old Arcanite with half his face replaced by augmetics. "It's dangerous." Russ shook his head. "It's not the animal's fault. I think it was engineered. Someone modified it." Talek stepped forward. There was another freighter. It departed from the same outpost as ours. Disappeared en route. Perhaps related? Russ folded his arms. "You didn't think that was worth mentioning earlier?" "It was a different mission. Bioweapons testing, supposedly decommissioned." Russ's eyes narrowed. "You brought me a genetically modified predator and didn't tell me?" "We didn't know it was enhanced." Russ turned away, muttering to himself. "This is why I hate working off-planet." That night, the containment alarm blared. Russ bolted from his bunk and sprinted to the medbay. The kyrix had escaped. Security bots swarmed, but Russ shouted them down. "Don't shoot. I can handle it." He followed the trail scorch marks, broken panels, and snapped cables. The kyrix had gone into the maintenance tunnels. Russ grabbed his kit, injected himself with a stimulant, and crawled in. The darkness was suffocating, the air hot and metallic. Ahead, he heard growling and a hiss. He turned a corner and froze. The kyrix was there, but it wasn't alone. A second one, smaller, limped beside it. Blood matted its fur. Russ whispered, "Oh no." The second freighter hadn't disappeared. It had been intercepted, and this one had survived. The first kyrix snarled at Russ, positioning itself between him and the injured one. Russ knelt. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt her." He laid down his tools scanner, medpack, a wrapped protein bar. Then he waited. Minutes passed. The injured kyrix whined softly. Eventually, the first one stepped aside. Russ crawled forward, heart pounding. He examined the wound, deep gash along the flank, likely from another predator or a containment spike. He cleaned it, stitched it, and applied a coagulant spray. The creature winced but didn't bite. Back in the medbay, Russ stood over the two creatures now resting in a reinforced enclosure. Both were sedated and recovering. Talek entered, silent for once. "You said it was untreatable," Russ said. Talek looked down. "I was wrong." Russ exhaled. "It's not just about knowing the biology. You gotta understand the behavior, the fear, the instincts." Commander Helvin entered behind them. "And what now?" Russ didn't hesitate. "I take them back to Earth. We have specialists, behavioral scientists, trainers. They deserve a chance. You'll be responsible for them," Helvin said. Russ nodded. "I already am." The kyrix pup coughed once, a rough, wheezing sound that echoed in the silence of the medical wing. Russ glanced up from his monitor, frowning. It had been nearly 2 local cycles since they'd brought the second one in, and the wound was healing slower than it should. He tapped through the scan results again, eyes narrowing. "That's not a normal inflammation curve," he muttered. From across the room, Talek spoke without looking up from his datapad. "Should I inform station security?" "No, not unless her temperature spikes again. She's stable, just not bouncing back the way I'd expect." Russ stood and moved toward the enclosure. The larger kyrix, the one that had been transported first, watched him from the far corner, alert but still. The smaller one lay curled on its side, breathing shallow. He crouched by the barrier and spoke softly as he adjusted the feeder unit. "You're not just tired. Something's draining you." Talek approached, expression unreadable, though his upper eyelids twitched slightly. "You believe it is parasitic?" "Not unless the parasite's clever enough to hide from a full-bore tissue scan and a blood panel. No, it's something else. Maybe a reaction. Maybe a missing component." Talek's eyes flicked toward the injured kyrix. She was exposed to atmospheric decompression for several minutes. The freighter cabin was breached. Russ turned his head slowly. "That might have been helpful information yesterday. I was not aware it was relevant." "Your medical protocols are unorthodox." Russ stood and pulled off his gloves. "I'm not trying to impress a diagnostic AI. I'm trying to keep an animal alive. And if she went through decompression, she might have lost more than oxygen. Trace elements. Electrolytes. Maybe even gut flora." Talek blinked. "You intend to treat her with bacteria, probiotics?" "Yes. And probably a tailored nutrient slurry. I'll need access to a microculture lab." Talek didn't move. That requires level 4 clearance. Russ stared at him. Then go get it. Or we can watch her fade out over the next few days. Talek left without another word. By late second cycle, the nutrient base was ready. Russ stood in the observation room while the feeding tube was inserted. The pup barely stirred, but her vitals began to stabilize within 20 minutes. Not enough to call it a win, but enough to breathe. Behind him, a low clicking sound drew his attention. An entirely different alien stood there, now shorter, with 6 limbs folded neatly against a segmented torso. Its skin shimmered like wet stone. Russ didn't recognize the species. The alien stared through the glass. The larger one hasn't moved in over an hour. He's waiting, Russ said without turning. Worried. If she dies, he'll stop eating. You assume a familial bond. No, not family. They're a bonded pair. Possibly from the same litter. Could be imprinting, could be trauma. Doesn't matter. Separation isn't an option. The alien's back limbs made a faint tapping sound. You are human. Russ didn't answer. There was a vote among the station's senior council. They expected we would be dealing with a Terran scientist. Not a veterinarian. Russ crossed his arms. Same degree. Different patients. The alien studied him. Is it true that humans allow predators to live in their homes? Yes. Even after they attack. Depends who they attack. The alien tilted its head. And you believe this creature can be integrated? Russ exhaled. I believe she deserves a chance. That's different. He didn't wait for a reply. By the 4th cycle, the pup was upright again, though still weak. Russ entered the enclosure with a low stool and a handheld stem wand. He moved slowly, watching both kyrixes for tension. The larger one shifted slightly, but didn't growl. Okay, Russ said, crouching beside the younger one. Let's see if your joints are holding up. He began manipulating the limbs gently, checking for stiffness. The pup flinched at first, then slowly relaxed into the motion. He used the wand to stimulate muscle fibers, watching for tremors. So far, so good, he said under his breath. A softness behind him made him pause. A tall avian creature stood at the entrance, feathers twitching with what Russ guessed was impatience. You are requested in Central Assembly. Immediately. Russ didn't move. I'm in the middle of a session. Council protocol overrides. The session isn't optional, Russ said without raising his voice. You want me there. You wait until I'm done. The avian made a faint whistling sound and withdrew. Russ resumed the therapy. You see? Everyone's in a rush until they realize you're not. Later, in Central Assembly, Russ stood in the middle of a circular chamber surrounded by tiered seating. Over 30 species were represented, each watching him with varying degrees of suspicion. A tall, crystalline entity addressed him from the central podium. You were given temporary authority to stabilize the situation. That mission appears complete. Russ rubbed a hand over his jaw. Not quite. They're alive. That doesn't mean they're ready for release. Another voice, this one from a 4-eyed, aquatic body delegate in a floating chair. Release? You intend to return them to the wild? No, Russ said. I intend to take them back to Earth. They need ongoing care. Murmurs rose across the chamber. The crystalline being raised a hand. And what guarantee do we have that they won't become a threat there? Russ's eyes didn't leave the podium. The same guarantee you had when you let them on your ship in the first place. You already lost control once. Earth's facilities are better equipped. Talek's voice cut through the noise. He's correct. Our handling protocols were insufficient. The containment breach was our error. One of the delegates leaned forward. You're defending the human now? Talek nodded slowly. I observed his methods. His understanding of emotional regulation in predatory species is more advanced than ours. He recognized the behavioral pattern before our scanners did. Russ raised an eyebrow. Appreciate the endorsement. The crystalline being turned toward him. Very well. On one condition. You will not breed them. Russ blinked. They're not livestock. Nevertheless, they are not to be propagated. Fine. And if they escape? Who will answer for it? I will, Russ said. There was silence. Then the crystalline delegate touched a panel. Approved. By the time they loaded the kyrixes into the transport pod, Russ had already filed 6 forms, signed 3 liability waivers, and memorized the names of 2 delegates he'd have to report to monthly. Talek stood beside the launch ramp, watching as the pod sealed. You're risking a great deal for 2 unknowns, he said. Russ leaned against the bulkhead. They're not unknowns. Just misunderstood. Talek looked at him carefully. That is a very human thing to say. Russ held his gaze. That's the idea. He boarded without another word. The pod decoupled from the station and began its descent toward the planet's surface, where Earth's amber atmosphere shimmered in the distance. Inside, the kyrixes slept in their containment beds, monitors blinking steady. Russ sat beside them, arms crossed, eyes closed, already calculating the rehab schedule, dietary adjustments, and behavioral testing they'd need to go through. He didn't open his eyes when the pilot asked if he wanted to review landing protocols. He just said, "Wake me when we hit the tarmac." And then he slept. Russ sat cross-legged on the floor of the holding chamber, a stainless tray balanced on his knees. The kyrix male who still hadn't earned a proper name watched him from less than a meter away, ears tilted back, tail unmoving. "All right," Russ said as he peeled the cover off the tray, "you've got 3 protein options, 2 starches, and a vitamin blend that smells like battery acid. The sooner you pick, the sooner I can stop pretending this is a negotiation." The creature didn't move. Russ reached in and pulled out a thin strip of dried fish paste. "You're not fooling me. You're hungry. You've been ignoring the auto feeder for 2 days, and the last time you passed waste, it looked like dry moss." The kyrix blinked slowly. Russ tossed the strip onto the padded floor between them. "Start with that." The creature sniffed the air, then padded forward cautiously. It picked up the strip, chewed twice, and swallowed. Russ let out a long, silent breath. "Good. Now the rest." The kyrix ate the rest of the tray contents without hesitation. When it was done, it licked the floor once, then laid down, head on its front paws. From outside the enclosure, a figure tapped the observation glass. Russ stood up and exited through the pressure lock. The alien waiting for him was insectoid, with a narrow thorax and a wide head framed by articulated antennae. It wore a dark green lab shawl and carried a data slate clamped under 2 rigid arms. "You are Kane," the voice buzzed through a translator clipped to its side. "I am Supervisor Giltrax. I've reviewed your requisitions. They're unusual." "Unusual doesn't mean wrong," Russ said, wiping his hands on a towel. "What's the issue?" "Your limb brace request. You specified a flexible polymer with thermal response memory." Russ nodded. "That's right. The pup's gait is off. She's compensating by over-rotating her rear left. If I don't correct it now, she'll develop a permanent knee alignment problem. The council expected you to use standard immobilization. She's a quadruped that relies on spring loading from her back legs. A rigid brace would make her fall sideways every time she tries to turn." The insectoid blinked both sets of eyes. Russ folded the towel. "I'm not here to check boxes. I'm here to fix what you all broke." Giltrax tilted its head. "You believe the damage was not genetic? She wasn't born with the limp, which means it's either mechanical or psychosomatic. Either way, I need a brace that moves when she does." Giltrax handed over the slate. "Approved. But if the brace results in further injury, I'll own it," Russ said. "That's the job." Later that cycle, he crouched beside the pup, who now allowed him within touching distance without flinching. The brace was a slender, jointed band that stiffened when cool and flexed when warmed by the body's heat. It clicked softly as he adjusted the straps. She shifted her weight experimentally, then took a step. Wobbled. Took another. Less wobble. Russ smiled. "That's it. You're figuring it out." The male watched from the corner. No movement, but the ears were forward now. By late second cycle, both kyrixes had begun responding to environmental cues without showing signs of stress. Russ introduced low-level stimuli, recorded sounds, varying light levels, even a simulated wind current. Both adapted quickly. Too quickly. He sat with Giltrax in the monitoring room, reviewing footage. "That's not just instinct. They're problem-solving." Giltrax adjusted the feed angle. "You suspect enhanced cognition?" "I don't suspect. I'm sure." The female learned how to deactivate her feeder's safety lock. I had to reprogram it 3 times. They are not classified as sapient. They're not classified as much of anything, because we've only seen them under stress conditions. You put anything through trauma and it stops acting like itself. Giltrax tapped a claw against the console. "The council is considering reclassification." "Good. Because if they're this responsive now, they'll need enrichment programs soon. Otherwise, they'll stagnate." "You intend to train them?" "I intend to give them choices," Russ said. "Training's what you do to make something obedient. Rehabilitation is about trust." That evening, Russ returned to the enclosure with a shallow basin filled with sand. He placed it in the center and stepped back. Both kyrixes approached, sniffed, then began pawing at it. He crouched beside the wall. "Where I'm from, Dogs dig when they're bored or anxious. Or just because it's fun. The male dropped to his chest and rolled, sending a cloud of sand over his back. Russ leaned against the wall. Yeah, that's what I thought. 2 days later, the station commander summoned him. The meeting room was small, dimly lit, and filled with the faint scent of disinfectant. You've been granted full discharge authority, the commander said without preamble. Russ raised an eyebrow. Discharge to where? Earth. Or another accredited sanctuary. But they are no longer the station's responsibility. I didn't ask for that. You didn't need to. The council reviewed your reports. They're convinced the animals are no longer a threat. They never were. The commander's gaze was unreadable. That's not a consensus view. Russ folded his arms. I don't care about consensus. I care about outcomes. The outcome is this. You have 36 hours to remove them from the premises. After that, the station's liability expires. Fine. I'll have them ready. He returned to the med bay and began prepping the travel crates. Not the ones used for containment, these were padded, pressure-stabilized, designed for comfort. He adjusted the interior lighting, set the temperature controls, and added one of the sand basins. Jill Trax arrived mid-process. You were leaving. Apparently so. They're healthy? Healthy enough to leave. Not done healing, but that'll take time and space. Jill Trax watched him for a moment. You will not return? I don't think I'm welcome. The alien's antennae curled slightly. You are not unwelcome. Russ chuckled. That's almost a compliment. Jill Trax held out a small cube. This contains our behavioral logs. In case you wish to continue analysis. Russ accepted the cube. Thanks. Departure was uneventful. The kyrixes entered the crates without resistance. No sedation needed. No restraints. Just two creatures who had learned, in their own way, that not every hand reached out to hurt. As the shuttle disengaged from the docking ring, Russ strapped into his seat and glanced back at the cargo section. The crate sensors blinked green. Heart rate steady. Respiratory normal. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Hours later, nearing atmospheric entry, the pilot's voice buzzed over the comm. Manual override needed for descent calibration. Something about the crate ballast. Russ unbuckled and moved to the rear. One of the crates had shifted slightly during acceleration. He adjusted the strapping, then paused. The female kyrix was awake, watching him. Her eyes tracked his movement, but there was no tension in her body. Just curiosity. He tapped the side of the crate. Almost home. She made a low, breathy sound. Not a growl. Something else. Russ sat back on his heels, eyes tired but clear. You're going to like Earth. Lots of open space. Real wind, not recycled air. And no one trying to shoot you in the neck with plasma darts. She blinked once. The shuttle touched down just past local dawn. Medical transport teams waited, along with a representative from the Earth Wildlife Integration Board. All procedures were standard. No drama. Just paperwork and scanning. Russ walked beside the hover platform as the kyrixes were moved into the transfer cells. He kept a hand on the edge, not because they needed it, but because he wasn't quite ready to let go. The board rep looked over the intake form. You sure about the non-sedation clause? Russ nodded. They're calm. They know what's happening. They're not tagged. They don't need collars. I implanted subdermals on arrival. The rep raised an eyebrow. That's not in the log. I didn't file it yet. I was busy keeping them alive. The rep said nothing more. Once the platform disappeared into the facility, Russ stood alone by the unloading bay, hands in his coat pockets. Behind him, a staffer approached. Human. Young. Nervous. You're Kane, right? The vet. Russ turned. The staffer pointed toward the facility. They told me those things tore through a cargo ship. Killed people. They did what they had to do to survive. The staffer hesitated. Are they safe now? Russ looked toward the horizon. They were never the dangerous ones.